It has been 6 weeks since we were disappointed by a Sony Marvel movie. Will Kraven break the streak? Let's talk about it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So today we'll be discussing or debating Kraven the Hunter. But before we get into that, we're here to give you movie recommendations. What's the best recent thing that you have seen that you want to give to the people?
We talk about Star Wars a lot on this and how disappointed we are into kind of like what they're producing at the moment. But I will say, I watched the Skeleton Crew just out of curiosity the other day, only the first episode, and I was pleasantly surprised, especially because it follows a bunch of kids around. Actually, it was just good, kind of like good, just like adventurous fun, pretty much. It's about this like sort of boy who's on this planet, which kind of like the rest of the Star Wars galaxy don't believe it exists, just because of sort of how nice and how different it is from sort of the rest of the Star Wars universe, or the rest of the sort of planets that most people are from. And essentially this boy is obsessed with Jedis and thinks he's discovered a Jedi temple in the mountain somewhere. So he goes to sort of explore it. And then these sort of few other kids are also there, sort of looking at the same loot, essentially. And it turns out it's not a Jedi base. It's actually a starship. So they kind of reboot this ship that's been sort of kind of like dormant for ages, and it blasts them out of the galaxy, and it blasts them far, far away from. I'm actually spoiling the first episode, but I think this is kind of like just premise and setup, anyways. To be fair, but it kind of like blasts them far, far away from where their home is. And essentially they're just trying to figure out how they get back home. What I loved a lot about it was just kind of like the character dynamics, and I know it's like kind of like child actors and stuff like that, but just kind of like seeing just some of the fun, playful interactions, some like the teasing and stuff like that was just like just entertaining. It was just like really well done in terms of sort of how they established the characters in this show. So yet to go into episode 2, but once I do, I'm very much looking forward to seeing how it plays out for the rest of the season.
Is it actually aimed at children, or is it more universal audiences?
Hard to say so far. Hard to say, yeah. Again, like a lot of the main characters in this are children. Only one of the kids' dads are a side character in this as well from the first episode. Anyways, I mean, where they kind of like end up is, you know, they're just a bunch of like kind of like innocent kids from this like planet where, again, it's very, very different from the rest of the galaxy. And they just find themselves amongst the scoundrels, the like kind of like the ragged bunch in the rest of the galaxy. So yeah, we'll kind of see how it plays out in terms of sort of where it's mainly targeted at.
Well, I mean, like I can get on board with like teenagers or even children as characters, but like a movie can be focused on child characters and not be a children's movie. You see what I mean? So it's kind of not explicitly aimed at children.
So far, I wouldn't say it's explicitly aimed at children. Yeah. Because
my reaction to Skeleton Crew and reports that it was not bad was like, I'm glad somebody made some good Star Wars, but I wish it was something I was more interested in. Mm-hmm. Right? That's kind of why I was asking, because it certainly presents itself like a children's show, right? In terms of like the marketing and stuff like that.
No, yeah. That's why I said we'll see how it plays out, because again, it's got the child focus behind it, but then it's more about the themes and like sort of kind of like not the messaging, but like kind of like the story that's unfolding in it, and sort of whether it lends itself well to sort of both children as well as sort of adults that might be watching it with their kids as well. So that's kind of what I want to see, how that evolves.
Well, I've started watching a Netflix series called Raising Dion. In episode 2, I think I'm on episode 2, so I haven't really seen much of what's going on, but from what I've seen so far, single mother finds out that her son is developing or has superpowers. I don't know how much more he can do. Well, yeah, he is. He's each episode from the 2 episodes I've seen, he finds out he's got more powers. So yeah, so he's definitely developing superpowers, and then she tries to figure out how he's got superpowers and like why. And I think there's like dangers as well that's coming. Obviously, he's got superpowers, and there has to be some sort of antagonist threat. She pretty much just protects her son and tries to figure out the mystery behind his superpowers. And obviously, she's a widow as well. Michael B. Jordan's in this movie as well. I think he was a dad. He's dead. Well, I don't know if he's dead actually, because there was a scene where you kind of like see his spirit or ghost or something like that. You see a bunch of them. So I don't know how his story is gonna end up developing, but yeah, it's all right so far. I'm still gonna give it more of a chance because, like I said, it's so far I'm kind of engaged. The acting, like kid, look, as a kid, like I said, with kid actors, I always give them grace. So he's all right. He's actually doing good. He's doing a good job. It's just, I just find it very hard to watch kid actors. So that's something which I've started to, I'm trying to train myself to start watching more films with the main actors being lead, the main lead actors being kids. Because Stranger Things, I want to catch that as well. But it's just the whole kids being the main actors is just so off-putting. Obviously, because the genre is horror, and it's like that's always been a pet peeve of mine. But yeah, so far, is Raising Dion is cool. Is definitely is. I'd recommend it.
So mine is definitely one aimed at adults. So I've been rewatching Silicon Valley, which is a 2014 comedy series essentially about the startup company in Silicon Valley, about this guy who works for a tech company, and he kind of develops this revolutionary algorithm that has the potential to be worth billions at some point. And so he goes off to found his own company, and he essentially tries to kind of make it in Silicon Valley. So he kind of tries to secure funding for his company, and he tries to persevere against rivals and people trying to take advantage of him. And he's tempted to compromise his ideals to make a whole lot of money very quickly. So it's a very intelligent treatment of what Silicon Valley was like at that point, kind of at the height of the tech boom. It has a lot to say about tech culture and corporate culture and the superficiality of it all. And it's very, like, if you want like a masterclass in satire, I think Silicon Valley is it, because it shows that it understands the subject matter it's talking about, and it does a lot of work to kind of justify its point of view and its thesis through the plots and the decisions characters make, by showing them be awful people or make compromises or succeed or fail and suffer setbacks or victories. And on top of that, it's just very funny. It's infinitely quotable. It's just a joy to watch.
Oh yeah, I put that on my watch list, so I'm gonna get to that as well. Hi guys, the main event. Kraven the Hunter. Danny G, do you want to let the people know what the hell is Kraven the Hunter?
So, Kraven the Hunter is the 6th and maybe final installment in the Sony cinematic universe. It follows Sergei Kravinov, who is the son of this Russian crime boss who, while on safari, gets bitten by a radioactive lion or something like that and develops superpowers. And 20 years later is this vigilante who goes after essentially bad people, like crime bosses and poachers and all sorts of different people. And he also butts heads with his father, who wants Kraven to follow in his footsteps as the boss of this crime syndicate. That's essentially the idea behind Kraven. So what did we think of Kraven the Hunter?
You're gonna say you liked it. Go on.
You know what? Me and Daniel were talking all about this in the office for the past on Monday, and the way that I was just like, obviously, I wasn't gonna watch no reviews, but of course, you hear what people are saying. You know what I'm saying, social media and stuff, and people were just killing this movie. So already with what Sony have given us this year, even with Venom, I was disappointed. Like, bro? Sony have like peed me off when it comes to, like, they have all of these, that they've got these remarkable IPs, these characters that they could make crazy stories from, amazing stories from, but they just ruin it. So with Kraven going into this film, I tried to block out the chatter, but it was just hard to block it out because it's just so much. So I'm really going into this thinking, okay, let me see why this film is so horrible. So what I can say with Chest is I actually liked the film, but I understand why people were calling it shite. This for me was a movie that could have been a great movie, which is why it pisses me off. And why it pisses me off is because the way that the story was told was, I wouldn't say it was awful, but it just wasn't good. And what I mean by that is, firstly, the acting was, I think I was hearing, I could see voiceovers, especially when it comes to the girl character, the black girl. I saw a lot of voiceovers that was happening from her. Like the relationship dynamics was so dull between them two, and it wasn't dull between Kraven and his dad, but it should have been better. what stood out for me and why I think I actually liked the film was, number one, the action scenes were probably one of the best action scenes I've seen from a Sony movie this year. Number two was the kind of storyline and the relationship dynamic between the brother's character, so Craven's brother's character, because I was invested to see how his story was going to end up, like what was going to happen in his journey. Those type of storylines are my type of storylines. That's why I think I liked it as well. And obviously the action scenes for me were really good. Like I was definitely immersed with the action scenes. However, like I said, just the way that the story was told, unfortunately, it just felt inconsistent, man. It felt like they were jumping into parts of the story. Because a lot of people had an issue with how they cut from obviously the 8-minute clip that they showed on Sony, and then they cut straight to the backstory of Kraven and his brother. I didn't have an issue with that. I don't know why a lot of you had an issue with that. Of course, there were issues, especially with the whole Kraven turning into Kraven, with like the whole I don't know what it was, but it was some sort of potion. I don't even know if they call it a potion, but whatever it was, I don't understand how that tied in with the African history or the African.
I don't think it did.
It was, yeah, so that just felt like a filler. I didn't like that was nonsense. But so there was a lot of things which just Sony garbage. However, one thing I did think that they got right was just like the itty-gritty, the violence, and like I said, the whole storyline between Kraven, the dad, and the brother, but mainly because of the brother story. If there wasn't the brother story and it was just Kraven and the dad and let's say Kraven's brother was like Kraven, then I think I wouldn't have liked the movie at all. I think that it would have been caca. But I think the brother story made me that's why I'm pissed off. I'm like, yo, you lot actually had a great setup, a great storyline for me. Just the way that you guys told it wasn't great. It really wasn't great. That's why I'm definitely, if there's a sequel, I want there to be a sequel, but I want them to fix up. I really want them to like just don't make the same mistakes they made with the first one. Just fix up when it comes to the second one, because I'm invested in how Kraven and his brother is going to turn out. But yeah, actually, I liked the film. I understand why people are saying it was shite.
I mean, it was better than Madam Web. That's for sure. I mean, even that's an extremely low bar. I think, like you, I was kind of hoping to like the movie, especially when we got the Spider-Man game, whether it was this year or last year, and they had Kraven in that. And the way he was portrayed, it was like quite interesting. It wasn't like fully fleshed out. It was like, okay, this is my first introduction to sort of Kraven as a character. And the idea of him seemed interesting. So, of course, sort of kind of going into this movie, I was like, let's see what Sony does with him. In true Sony sense, they do nothing of interest with him, especially like him, you know, his whole thing is his name is Kraven the Hunter in this movie. And I was like really trying to look for where they had some type of like sequence or action set piece or something like that, where it kind of like shows him hunting and stalking his prey and sort of kind of just, you know, living up to his name as the hunter, as opposed to just turning up in places and beating people up and needing sort of, you know, people's help to identify who's who and sort of, you know, where people are and this, that, and the other. It was really jarring, because like every time that there was like any type of action coming up, I was looking for that and I didn't get what I was looking for in that. The story was whatever. It was kind of like a bit of a mess how like they brought it all together. It was very unfocused as well. In terms of, again, you had like the father and the brother storyline, which was probably the most interesting one that sort of, they probably should have focused a lot more on, but they convoluted it with the whole, you know, him being a vigilante, kind of going after people, as well as sort of this whole like Rhino subplot that they had going on, mixed with kind of like whatever else. Like the movie kind of just didn't have any specific focus. So again, like you said, it just kind of felt like we were kind of jumping from one thing to another without really any clear direction as to sort of where the movie was going or what the movie sort of wanted to be about, essentially. And then again, you had a lot of kind of like useless, redundant characters. I think what was the girl's name, like Calypso or whatever her name was. Like, and I feel bad to kind of like rag on her, but like there really wasn't anything of interest sort of there or anything sort of done interestingly with her character. Rhino was like somewhat cool and his dad was cool, but again, it just didn't come together well enough for me in this. And probably the biggest sin and the most annoying thing is that nothing was really explained in this movie in terms of like the vial, where that came from, what it really did for him, what powers he actually really had in this. It was just kind of, he just moves like an animal and sort of is super strong or whatever. Even like the character like the foreigner, who just kind of again was like a big redundant character, was in there. Power set wasn't really explained. Was he like super fast? Was he slowing down time? It's not really clear what he was doing, and it's not really clear the the purpose of him in the story, or like why he was needed to be in addition to this. So overall, it was more Sony crap, more just kind of all over the place movie with, you know, a story that's incoherent, you know, not written well, not handled well, and yeah, nothing more to say than that.
My bottom line is this is the best Sony movie yet, which does not make it a good movie. I think the others are just worse. So in typical Sony fashion, Kraven is not Kraven. They just took the name and the most basic aesthetic of the character and then turned him into a completely different character. At which point I have to ask, like, why? Like if you don't care about anything, couldn't you have just adapted one of the Kraven stories and just taken out Spider-Man and replaced him with something else? Does this really make anybody happy, right? If you're a Kraven fan, you're not getting Kraven. If you're not a Kraven fan, then why does the name recognition have appeal to you? I just don't get that decision-making process at all. I think there are good pieces in here, like the opening sequence, which are the 8 minutes that were put out before the launch of the movie, where Kraven infiltrates a Russian prison, assassinates somebody, and then escapes. I thought that was a good sequence. This whole idea of him kind of being this heir to this crime empire and trying to walk away from that, but not being able to walk away from that because he still cares about his family, especially his brother, and the two unequal brothers, like the good son and the bad son, and the good son is supposed to want power but doesn't want it, and the one who wants power is not in line for succession, right? That's the exact same setup as in the Aquaman movies as well, or in the Thor movies, and that's a setup that you can use for good stories. But this movie is at least an hour too long because of all the nonsense it piles in, where things are way too long and pointless. And I think if you took just the pieces in this, you could tell a really interesting story about strength and dynasties and heritage and all of these things that could be something, but it's not really, because Sony just can't tell a story to save their lives. It does not add up to like a story that really says anything or hangs together in a way that is satisfying. And the good pieces are way too short. A couple of minutes of pretty decent action sequences are not enough to justify a 2-hour runtime, in my opinion. If you spend the bulk of your runtime on other things, then those other things have to be interesting as well, and they just aren't. So, big waste of time, in my opinion.
So I'll agree with the part where you said there was good things in the story that you could have focused on, especially like the relationship between, you know, the brother, just like the whole family dynamic. They could have focused on that more. And what I find it a bit weird and strange is there wasn't a lot of characters in this in terms of like who were focused, like who the story was focused on. So they could have had time to kind of like flesh out a good story around those themes in terms of like, you know, just the dysfunctional family, power within the family. Just, you know, they could have focused on that a bit more. And I do agree. I think Sony, I even said Sony, the way that they just told the story wasn't great. I thought that actually this was probably one of the best I've seen.
No,
from Sony.
that was my point. I said I liked them for the most part. They just are not a large enough part of the movie to justify the movie.
Yeah, okay.
So I think if you tell the story about Kraven has walked away from his family, right, and his father wants him to run the crime empire one day, but he's just refused it, and he still maintains a connection to his brother, but that's it. And then the brother gets abducted, and so father and son have to work together for the good of the family, but they have different ideas of what family is about and what you should do for family and how you should relate to it and stuff like that. But they have to work together to save the brother because that's the one thing they both want. That's a good story. And they should have made a movie about that story, and they didn't. One of the many subplots that takes up a not large enough part of the movie for it to be the movie. Because we get to that like over an hour in, and that is not good enough.
I think also the rewrites definitely showed, because it just felt dysfunctional, bro. Like I was watching this, I was like, okay, like they're just jumping into stuff. Like it honestly feels like you could see the rewrites when it was happening. I was like, okay, you can tell that they reread that part. You can tell because it felt like they were trying to make it cohesive, but it just wasn't. Like you said, it was like there was certain themes, like there was certain things that were happening that they should, especially like the good parts of the story that were happening, but was too short. And I think that's where the rewrites were happening. It was like, okay, they had a good part, and then they rewritten into like a new part of the story, if that made sense. So, oh man, do you think they should have just, I wouldn't say scrap it, but
yeah, scrap it, start again.
Maybe, yeah, start again. I was gonna say, so you think they should start again, guys?
Yeah, I think so. Like they should have at some point realized, okay, this is the actual story we want to tell. Actually, like I don't even know they're capable of that, right? Let's say they can, right? Let's say they say, okay, we had 3 false starts, and now we know what the movie is, and for the sake of it being actually like something people will want to watch, and that will therefore make us money, like we have to just tell a coherent story. If that means doing enough reshoots for half the movie, I guess that's what you have to do, right? They're already going to lose massive amounts of money on this, right? Like I've said before that one of my big existential crises this year was Madam Web making $100 million, because nobody should have looked at that and said, yeah, that's something I want to spend time and money on. But this one is currently at 26 million after the first weekend, right? So this will not get even close to breaking even. This is just an outright loss. And at that point, spending just a bit more money to have a coherent story so that there actually is an audience for it that isn't just there for, that is not willing to sit through over 2 hours in order to get about 10 minutes of halfway decent action. And maybe like that's what it would have taken to fix this movie.
But one thing I will say to kind of give them the benefit of the doubt, I do think
with 6 movies in.
But that's the thing I was going to say. I think Sony have shot themselves in the foot, and they've set a foundation where it's like they've left a sour taste in people's mouth. So with Kraven, what I think is a lot of the, like, I do think they did set themselves up as well when they put 8 minutes out. That's a pet peeve of mine. I just didn't like that. That kind of like lost interest for me when it comes to the movie. However, I do think.
Sorry to interrupt before you move on. It's very telling that those are the good 8 minutes, right? Like this is very much like giving the first 3 episodes of a season to critics, and then from season 4 onward, the quality takes a nosedive, right? This is very calculated, right? They made enough good movie to do this because on paper, this is a strategy that suggests they have confidence in the movie because they're putting out such a large chunk of it. Like you can't fake a full 8 minutes, right? Turns out if you have 9 minutes of good footage and you show 8 of them, you can, and that's what they did. Right, you basically, if you see those 8 minutes, you've seen the good most of the good bits. You watch the trailer and you've seen the rest.
I hate and I agree. However, don't you guys think people are looking for an excuse to hate the movie though? And I'm saying that because
but it's because they've like served up so much bad movies that people have bad will going into these movies, and if anything, it's just confirmation bias now. When people are going to watch these movies, it's like this is going to suck, and when it does suck, because it sucked and people knew it was going to suck, they kind of like bash on it a little bit more, it seems, at the moment. I think it's coming from a place of like frustration and like annoyance, because you've got some like really good characters here, like Venom, you've got, you know, Kraven, etc. I mean, no one really asked for Madam Web to be made, but you know, some of these other characters, it's like you're seeing what sort of Marvel in that are doing with sort of the characters. And you see what Marvel did with Spider-Man in terms of kind of like breathing new life into it. And then you've got Sony hogging these characters just for the sake of, you know, these licensing deals. And I get that they've generated good money from like the Venom and stuff like that, Venom movies and whatever. But it's just frustrating that, you know, they don't really care to put the quality in these movies. So if you don't care to sort of put the quality in to tell good stories or to sort of make anything halfway decent, as opposed to just putting something out to make a profit because it's tied to Spider-Man, then I don't care if people are being overly harsh on it. It's very much, for me, it's very well deserved. It's very much deserved, and long may it continue until they either give the rights back to Marvel or they actually come up with some type of decent ideas for these characters. But for me, all the goodwill, like I never had any goodwill anyways, but it really is now badwill, because this was probably the last one that I had any kind of like hope or interest in. I was like, okay, Kraven, this is different, this is whatever, but they absolutely butchered this character. We can talk about the changes that they made to the character and sort of why, like whether it was necessary or not. It's really frustrating. So
before we do that, I think there's a few different things going on here. One of them is that there are 6 movies in, and so they have no excuse. They should know what they're doing at this point, right? In addition, the outrage industrial complex is in full swing, and I think it's completely decoupled from the actual movie. If you just look at your feed and see the Kraven reviews coming in for the past couple of days, it's all acting as if this was the biggest garbage fire ever made. And it's not. It's just a really mediocre movie. Like, it's a really incompetently made movie that is completely forgettable and that has some good bits in it and a lot of not so good bits and some really shockingly bad bits, which I'm sure we can get to. But it's not like this. It's not Madam Web was like a train wreck of incredible proportions, right? And this is not it, right? This is just a not very good movie.
Everyone hates Madam Web. Flipping out. This is.
And for good reason.
Madam Web has become culture. Whoa! Oh my god.
I mean, like that movie is just outright broken, right? This is like I don't know what. Like you order a pizza and you get just a pile of melted cheese and I don't know and wrapped in sellotape or something. Like that's Madam Web. Like that's not even a movie. And I think that is like the gold standard for a broken movie that should, like I've said, like I think in our Madam Web review, I said, like there should be such a thing as cinematic malpractice, where if the movie is simply not fit for purpose, then you should get a refund. Like anybody who bought a ticket to Madam Web should get a refund because it's not a functioning movie, right? And there's no such thing. Like all they have to do is trick you into buying a ticket, and then that's game over. But like if there's ever any argument for why something like that should exist, it's Madam Web, right? And that is different from just a bad movie. Like Kraven is just a bad movie. And companies like Sony have created this culture of essentially people making a living from being outraged at how awful this movie is. And so they cannot simply say, like we can say this because this is a hobby and we're not making any money from this, right? And we don't intend to ever. But if it's your job, then you have to farm the outrage. You have no other choice. And the audience has been trained to expect this from movies. And for an entire generation, this is just how movies are, especially like movies like this. This is the fault of companies like Sony. And there's no reason for doing this. Like, even if you are not faithful to the character, right? Like, even if you do the version that's in this movie, there's still pieces here could be turned into a real movie if you only tried. And they aren't trying because they make money anyway. Like, in this case, they probably won't make enough. But overall, I don't think they've lost money on their Spider-Man project. Mostly because of Venom. But they don't have to try, really, right? Like, there's no direct correlation between making a good movie and making more money, right? If there was, then they would try harder. That's kind of my thing with how the reception of this movie has gone down.
But the reception seems mixed. Like, for example, you guys are calling this a bad movie. I don't think it's a bad movie. I think it's a goodish movie. However, I'm not going to argue with you guys when it comes to this. I don't have enough, because I did say the way that the story was told, it wasn't great. It was not great. However, in comparison to movies like flipping Venom 3, Madam Web, what others have they dropped this year?
Morbius. No, Morbius wasn't this year. There was a third one this year. Venom Web was February this year. Venom was October. Kraven was December. So
okay, cool. Okay, so not even this year, but their previous projects, I can't even remember Morbius. So out of everything that they've dropped, right, this was the best one. I'm saying the best one. So. I understand, and I get you're saying that just because it's the best one, it doesn't mean it's good. I understand that, but for me, it was good because I do think, like, even though, you know, I understand the story makes a movie, I do agree, but there were things from the movie, like I said, there were parts in the story, as well as great action, which doesn't make this a bad movie. Like, there's been other movies that are like Venom 3, which the story wasn't even great, and the action wasn't even that great. The action wasn't even enough, and the story wasn't even that great either. So it's like, but that's been the way that Venom's reception seems better than Kraven, which I'm finding a bit baffling, and I don't get how.
So I think Venom has built up goodwill over the course of 2 movies that at least worked, right? Kraven is just a new one. Nobody's really all that invested in Kraven. If you're invested in Kraven, then you're probably in the comic book version, which you didn't get here anyway, and that's one more thing to complain about. So here's the thing, right? Like, we can go down the list of other things that are not great and broken and whatever, but like, just as an example, we get this 20-minute flashback sequence, and I'm not against flashbacks, right? But it's just, you could have just had a scene in this movie where he talks about he went on safari with his parents and he almost died, and when he came back to life, he had these animal powers. That's all that happens in those 20 movies. Not much more. Like, and like, the one other thing that's maybe worth mentioning from that entire sequence is the expectations of the father towards the sons, and that comes through in other scenes. So that's already 20 minutes wasted. And then a bunch of more stuff happens, and he meets Calypso, and he just meets her, right? Like, he says he can track everybody, and that's how he found her, but we don't really see him trying to find her. He just shows up at the funeral, right? And they then have this exposition scene where they recap everything that's happened in the last 30 minutes of the movie, where he just retells the entire story again to her. And the purpose of him tracking her down is that he is the perfect hunter who can track anybody anywhere, and so he needs her to find some people for him so he can kill them. Do you see the contradiction?
This was part of my problem. This is part of my problem in terms of like him not living up to his name in this movie, was that he kept having to go to people to help him track people down in this thing. And as I was watching it, I was kind of thinking of the Batman movie with Robert Pattinson in terms of like how that played out, of him sort of kind of being a bit more of a detective in that movie, and sort of him having to like kind of put the clues together and things like that. And of course he had like Jim Gordon as a partner who he was kind of like unfolding the mystery with. And I was like, you could have had something along some of those lines of, even, you know, if you wanted to change his character to sort of be a little bit more animal loving or whatever, you're in this world where there's like these like fantastical people, like you've got people like Rhino in this and people like the Foreigner. So you could have had an ultimate bad guy who maybe wasn't an animal, but was, I don't know, some type of like super powered being or whatever that he needed to track down, and that was like his like kind of like long game. And
that's the Spider-Man story, where he has hunted every other big game in Africa, and now he goes to New York to hunt Spider-Man.
The final hunt, basically. Yeah. And you could have even tied it in with sort of the whole like father plot, like you said, in terms of like him and his father having to go and sort of kind of like uncover the thing together or whatever. But that's everything that was missing in the story, was like him actually being a hunter and like him tracking down, like using clues, tracking things down, finding things out about people, being like showing him to be like clever and showing that, you know, everything that he's learned from his father. And again, you have like that dynamic in terms of like his father's kind of like taught him a lot of what he knows, but again, he wants to kind of go against his father and this and the other, and there's like, you know, some interesting conflict that can come from that as well. But it just wasn't there in this movie at all. We
never see him track anybody down, right? We skip right to the point where he has found them. Like, I actually kind of like the whole thing where he tracks down this poacher in London, and he pins the guy to the wall with the crossbow, and then he leaves and the door closes and there's a second guy stuck to the door.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably my favorite shot in the movie, because that was kind of clever.
And that works in the sense of like you don't really need to show him hunting those two specifically that well, but somebody like there needed to be like the end goal in terms of like, I need to find this person and I need to use all of the skills that I have and this name of the hunter that everyone calls me by. I need to use that to sort of know to find this person, and it just it was just lacking. It was lacking.
Related to that is Calypso, right? Who is completely pointless in this. Like she's like four things at once, and none of them really matter, right? She's a high-powered London lawyer who is connected to kind of the seedier parts of high society, right? And she's supposed to be kind of his into that world, but he already runs in those circles. And then she's also this African mystic. Never mind that Tarot is not African, right? Like, could you not have, like, give me 5 minutes on Wikipedia, I can find some kind of African divination tradition that they can use instead of Tarot, right? Never mind that. It's just lazy, right? It's not my only complaint about that is that it's lazy. And then she's this super archer who defeats the bad guy in the end.
Yeah, yes.
Or Kraven. And that comes out of nowhere. That's not part of the character. Like, I think there's a line that says something like she used to do archery for sport or something. Yeah. She was pretty good at it. But then it turns out she's this master. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Just make it part of her character, make it part of her story. It's just all jumbled and messy, and like they don't commit to anything. And maybe each of those versions at one point was in part of the movie, but it's not in this version. So, like, I think you can probably cut her from the movie, and you have the same movie.
That's what I was gonna say. I felt like they did her dirty because she just felt like a filler character.
Mm-hmm. 4 filler characters.
Yeah, especially with the whole, when I saw that crossbow scene, my reaction in that cinema, I was like, what the flip? And then I was like, no. And even there was one scene where she got dressed, which I know that's I might be nitpicking here, but remember the scene where I think she saw, I don't know what she saw, I think she saw an explosion or something, and then she got dressed in like superhero attire. I was like, wait.
Yeah, I think she watches Kraven lose the fight against the poachers, right, or against the mercenaries. Yeah. So she puts on that outfit. I don't remember where she gets it from or how or why she wears it. I don't remember off the top of my head.
That's just the point I was going to make with that. Is just like the purpose behind her decisions wasn't really making sense. It was just like it had to be done for that moment. But it was like there wasn't preparation towards it. It was like, okay, why is it happening? Do you know what I'm saying? So it was just they just added it because it made sense to the story to help the story. But I was like,
I was like, what was the most frustrating thing about her being one to kill the foreigner as well was that this is the first time you've seen Kraven come up against someone that of superpower being as well, and isn't just some type of goon that he can like quite easily sort of beat up and dismantle or whatever. And it's like, okay, he's facing some type of adversity in this situation. How does he overcome it? And he doesn't. Like he gets saved by this girl. So it's like, okay, why do I care about Kraven? Like why? Like what is it about Kraven that's meant to sort of make me super invested and make me sort of make him the protagonist that I want to see for, you know, multiple movies? And it's just like, you know, they failed in multiple places, in my opinion.
And if the point was that he has to work together with somebody and trust somebody, as opposed to going it alone all the time, and that is how he wins in the end, maybe make that the story. Right? Like I don't really care that she's a good archer. Just make it part of her character, and make it part of the story why she's there and why she's important. Yeah. And to like put him into a position where he has to learn to trust her, or has to convince her to work with him, or something like that. Right? If that is a major part of the story, then we're in a good place again.
What was even crazier was that she found this person that she many years ago gave this potion to, discovers that he's using this to, you know, granted he's killing bad people, but he's out here killing people with sort of the power that he gave her or whatever. And she seemed so comfortable with it. Like there wasn't really much resistance to sort of what he was doing. And sort of when there was the whole, oh, I'll think about, you know, this arrangement that you kind of want to have, there wasn't a sort of kind of like point to come back to. It was, okay, like now we're in danger. Now the situation's kind of like up this ante or whatever. And she kind of just has to sort of follow along essentially. So there wasn't any real dilemma or conflict or sort of whatever in terms of sort of it just seemed like she was like too easily on board with him being a killer. Granted that she's the one that gave him the power.
You guys could argue though that she's a lawyer, and obviously as your lawyer, I think one of the main reasons why
I know you're gonna say that they need to show it. Like they need to show it somehow. Like we can't assume that because she isn't getting enough justice, which they try to do in this movie. They try to like just exposition it in there that, you know, these people are just kind of getting away.
She just says the system is broken. End of discussion. That's the entirety of the dialogue.
Yeah. So you were about to defend it now, but I couldn't let you just try to bring up that point. Like the movie even like attempted to back that up or even like show that in the movie.
You don't even see the bad guys being shielded by the law or something, and therefore a vigilante is needed or something. Like you could do that too. Like superheroes have worked with lawyers in the past, and the dynamic is essentially, well, I've taken the law as far as I can. It's not enough, so somebody needs to work outside the law to do this, and that even that is here. Like honestly, I'm not sure why she's a lawyer and why that is important and why that aids the story.
I understand what you guys are saying, but Daniel, a second ago you were saying how Kraven, instead of showing a whole flashback, Kraven could have just said a few lines about obviously his life. So she kind of did the same thing.
In what way?
Well, she just said in terms of like why there was an internal conflict and her motivation behind why she's helping Kraven, because she revealed that, you know.
So her friend, who is an activist, gets killed by these poachers, right? And then she just says the system is broken, but this is a crime. And we haven't seen the law fail. We haven't seen them be shielded from the law or by the law or something like that. We have there's a difference between show and tell, right?
Apparently, the person that was responsible for it or behind it was this drug lord that was in this prison anyways, in like whatever place. So
he did it as a thank you to the girl, though. Remember, she saved his life. So, and I saw that
in terms of like showing that the law is broken, is that this guy's in prison, but he's in prison in a different country or whatever like that. So it's like, okay, like I don't know, like I don't know what we were kind of like meant to get from sort of him being the person responsible, as opposed instead of just like the cool action scene that we got at the start of the movie.
So basically, like this comes down to the difference between showing and telling, right? Like she's just telling us that the law is broken, but instead of showing us what happens because the law is broken, right? Just simply somebody committing a crime does not show that the law is broken, right? Like the law would be broken if she tries to go through official channels, right, and tries to do it the above board way, and that is just doomed from the start, right? This is like what we get in a lot of Batman stories, where you simply cannot go after the guilty because the system is that corrupt, right? And we do not see this here. Like we just get one line where she outright says at the camera that the law is broken or the system is broken. And so we don't even bother trying, but we've not seen this. And that's the difference between showing and telling. What I said before was, if we want to communicate to the audience what Kraven's background is and why he does what he does, then we can do that in a couple of lines of dialogue in which he talks to somebody. Could be Calypso, could be somebody else, where he just explains his motivation, where he says, this is what I'm doing this, or this is why I have to do this, or something. You can craft a scene that accomplishes something in the plot that along the way tells us what Kraven's background is. So spending 20 minutes or something like that of screen time on something that could be explained in 1 or 2 sentences organically within the plot is just a waste of time. And so that was my complaint earlier. And that is the difference. Like, we do not need to see, like, have her try to file charges and she gets buried in paperwork or something like that, something that shows that there's no point doing this. And so somebody else has to do something. That would be a better way of doing that. And that would maybe have given her some semblance of a motivation. But then the question would be, does that hang together with the themes of the movie? Right? Like why is the law being broken part of the story? Why is that important? If we have a story about you have to be strong to protect yourself, because that's what everybody's about, right? That's what Nikolai, right? Like the father, his whole thing is that you have to be strong, otherwise other people will destroy you. The brother, Dimitri, right? His thing is, I'm not strong, therefore I have to adapt and be whatever other people want me to be, right? And that's the whole thing about being the chameleon. Kraven has this thing about, I am strong, therefore the things that I care about are protected. And then there was also something with Rhino's motivation about being strong. Something like everybody pushes him around until he becomes strong, and so he had to learn to be strong. Like, there are all these different characters who have this theme of being strong is what you have to be strong, and or otherwise you will be destroyed or other people will push you around. And I think that is really the core of the movie, if there was one. And the law being broken, I don't think has anything to do with that, really, other than maybe you have to take things into your own hand, possibly, but that's already reaching a bit. I think the movie had something good going on here with this whole strength as self-empowerment angle, but then it should have cut out all the stuff that was extraneous, which pretty much includes everything to do with Calypso and also the safari at the start. Like, all of that can be cut, and it's just about people having to be strong in order to be self-empowered, because this is a world in which the strong push around the weak, and Kraven is the one person who is different because he uses his strength to protect other people, or in many cases just animals in nature. If you do that, then you have a pretty good foundation for a decent movie. And then you focus the plot on the brother gets abducted, and so father and son, who hate each other, who do not see eye to eye, have to work together to get the brother back. And in doing so, they exchange kind of these ideas about family and how they view family and what being strong means and what it's for and why it's important and all of these things. And if you do that, you have a pretty good movie on your hands. And then you sprinkle some R-rated violence on top. And then suddenly we have a pretty decent movie. So it's not difficult, I don't think. And that is kind of why I said it's one of the better Sony movies, because the other Sony movies did not really have this foundation. I think Morbius had some decent things going on there, and we've talked about that in the past. But like at least the last Venom movie had nothing going on at all. Madam Web was a complete wreck that was like stitched together from the corpse of 6 different movies, like even worse than this one. But this movie was the one that actually had something interesting going on. It just, like, I don't know the production history of this. I don't know how many iterations it went through, like how many different scripts it went through, but it looks a lot like they accidentally had a good foundation for an interesting story and didn't realize it. And so they didn't know what was important in their movie and what wasn't. So we get the family stuff gets just as much screen time as the safari, which is completely superfluous. Gets just as much screen time as the stuff with Calypso that has nothing to do with anything. And that is why I think this movie is so disjointed and so frustrating to watch. Where if you're on the lookout for a decent story, you can see the foundation of one and the beginnings of one, but then the movie spends the bulk of its 127-minute runtime on all sorts of things that don't matter or that distract from that.
And
That's just my take.
It feels like it has main focuses rather than a main focus, which is where the whole like discombobulation comes from. And I think they should have just kept. So the main focus, so is the main focus the justice system is broken, or the pretty much the domino effect of evil people?
I think the foundation is self-empowerment through strength. You have to be strong, and then you can live life on your own terms. And if you aren't strong, then you are a tool of other people. Like I went through like the 5 different characters that have that as their central theme, and I think that is ultimately what the movie could be about if it wanted to. Like the system being broken, not a major part, right? That just basically justifies why Kraven has to go after the bad guys. But that's kind of like par for the course with superhero stories. Like that's always the case. So it doesn't do anything with it. And if you want to make a superhero story that is about that, you have to do a little bit more. Right, then now you're being compared to like Batman Begins and stuff like that, and you have to try a little bit harder to be convincing. So yeah, I think this is about being strong enough to live life on your own terms.
It seems like with the other themes, they tried to make it kind of like fit in with this, but it felt like 3 short films mixed in one.
At least, yeah.
Yeah.
Or like pieces of like somebody found like the reels for 4 different movies and didn't know what belonged to which movie and just pasted things together. Like that's also that I think that's how you can also describe it. And it's just like it comes down to quality. And like when I walked out of this movie, I was kind of freaking out a little bit. Like, how can we talk about this? Like, this is just meh. Like, this is just not good. But it's not necessarily in an interesting way. And like it just comes down to the people who made this are just bad at their jobs. Like they don't know how to tell a story. They don't know how to make a movie. They put some scenes together and call it a movie. And somehow they get to do this over and over again. And I don't know why. Like I kind of know why, but like it still puzzles me that at some point, if you've lost hundreds of millions of dollars for your employer, why are you still around? Like that's something that just keeps puzzling me about the movie industry. That these people, like it's always the same people again and again, right? And sometimes like they make bad movies, but those movies make a lot of money. But like this is not making a lot of money, right? Like, and this entire project has, like, outside of Venom, has not really, like, the smart thing to do would have been to scrap everything except Venom, right? Like that would have been the smart business decision, I think, because that's the only thing that wasn't crashing and burning immediately. But that's also not what they've been doing, or maybe that's what they will do going forward, right? Like within a week, we've had news that this was the end of the Sony shared universe. Which was never shared in the first place, but that's a different story. And then we've also had other messaging that says, look, we're taking the results seriously, and we're going to refocus on what works. So it's not clear what else is in the pipeline, but I think nothing has been announced. So it's going to be at least 2 years before the next thing.
Do you know what's even more baffling about all of this is that they've made 2 of the best Spider-Man movies in Across the Spider-Verse and Into the Spider-Verse. I don't know if you've seen Daniel.
I think I saw one of them.
But in terms of like storytelling and sort of kind of like crafting and stuff like that, it's like those 2 movies are fantastic movies in sort of so many ways, and sort of like how layered they are and like how deep they are and stuff. And it's like, how can you get it so right on the animation side, but everything live action, you're bombing? Like everything live action just seems to be in this whatever like production hell where like everything seems to be going wrong with those movies.
Probably different people, like different departments, and they probably don't talk to each other, would be my guess.
But it's all under Sony. That's the thing. It's like Sony.
Yeah, but these are big companies. They have different departments and different, reporting chains.
You would think though, like if you see like, because at the end of the day, they're making movies and they're sort of kind of like telling stories. One's just animated and one's live action, and it's like if you're constantly getting sort of negative feedback on the movies that you're making on the live action side, and on this side, you're being praised to the high heavens in terms of like the story that you're telling over here. It's like, would you not look to kind of bridge that gap as an exec? You would think, how can we bridge the gap and make sort of what's working over here? How can we translate that to sort of our live action stuff as well? Is my thoughts. It's like, that would be the most logical thing. Is like there has to be some type of communication. Someone has to be speaking.
But then you can ask the same question about, how can the Marvel people not take the Lucasfilm people aside and give them some pointers on how to run Star Wars? Right? It's the same company, ultimately.
It's the same company, but different entity. Because, like, this is still Spider-Man. This is still, like, I know it's, like, not part of their, like, sort of, their Spider-Man villain, whatever, like, universe that they're doing. But it's still in the same like kind of like Spider-Man, like Spider-Verse universe, essentially.
So it really depends on what the company culture is like, and maybe there's office politics going on that means they can't talk to each other or don't want to, or whatever. Or I would also question whether the Sony people like understand that these are bad movies. Not entirely sure. Like maybe they realize this and they just say, look, we can just like the company is so dysfunctional, this is the best we can do. Like the executives keep giving us these notes that we have to follow, and we realize they make the movie worse, but we have no choice, right? We're not in charge. That's also possible, but I'm not entirely sure that, or like on a story level, they understand what's wrong, because it's always the same thing, right? Like, and this is like really basic stuff, just trying to say, okay, this is the theme of our movie, and this is how the theme is reflected in these characters, and this is how that plays out in the conflict, and there's a resolution at the end that has a thesis about like a thing that takes a side in the conflict or whatever. Like these pieces are not. This is basically like, or it's basically an algorithm, right? You can basically do this in your sleep if you know what you're doing. And if you've done this before, and they just won't, I generally am confused about how this stuff happens, right? Because from the outside, looking at the final product, it seems so obvious that this is broken and this is not how stories are supposed to function. And I don't know what like creative choice or restriction they have that prevents them from telling a coherent story. I don't know, like if they start off with, okay, we have to use his characters because that's who we have the rights for. We have a story we want to tell, but we have to do it with Kraven because because it has to be a recognizable IP. Like I can understand that, but then even within that constraint, they still make all the wrong choices, right? Like this is not like a nitpicking about I would have wanted a Kraven movie to be something else, right? I have no opinion about Kraven as a character, right? And I'm actually kind of okay with this whole idea of like the version that's actually portrayed in this, I'm actually okay with if he was in a story that actually worked, right? Like if that was actually coherent and worked towards some kind of point, instead of having all these disjointed components that don't talk to each other. It's puzzling, right? My question then would be, is it our fault? Because this stuff does keep making money overall, right? Like people still show up.
I wouldn't say, well, I mean, outside of Madam Web, and sort of Venom, what's really made them any money, really? I mean, they've been panned critically. So sort of.
I don't think Madam Web even made the money, you know.
Madam Web lost a whole bunch. So $100 million budget, 102 million at the box office. So that's over 100 million lost. Venom 3 made them approximately 170 million by my numbers. Then we have Morbius, which broke even. Like I have this at minus 32 million. So with licensing and streaming and Blu-rays and whatever, that probably is slightly in the green. What else have we got? Venom 2 made 230 million profit. So overall, this thing made the money. And the only thing that's really terrible is Madam Web and now Kraven. Before this, everything kind of made the money or got close to breaking even.
To be like, I mean, Venom, I understand making the money, and like Morbius came at a point where you would think it would, and they leaned into the Vulture character being in there as well from sort of the Marvel universe as well. So they kind of like tricked people into sort of going to see that movie because of that link that it had with the MCU. So I'm not surprised that one kind of semi broke even essentially, but it's like, okay, we're now like you said, we're now 6 movies in. And you can't get away with these gimmicks anymore. And it seems like Marvel's taken a very hard, especially after Venom last dance, when they sort of completely retconned the Spider-Man No Way Home scene. It seems like Marvel has taken, a firm step away from these extra side characters that Sony are playing with. So it's like, you now have to make these characters hold up on their own. You now have completed the trilogy for Venom. What more do you have to offer to sort of put sort of butts in seats, and sort of what more do you have to offer to actually make money on these movies? And I'm convinced this is why they've pulled the plug, well, semi pulled the plug on it, because more movies will come, I'm sure, but it makes sense why they've kind of put a hold on these projects, because I think even they've kind of realized that they've probably pushed it as far as it can go in the current formula that they have. Maybe
we'll see where this lands, and this is also one movie, right? Like Madam Web, I think, by any accounting, is an anomaly, right? Like Kraven is nowhere near as broken as that. I had like one walkout in my showing, right? And I would have walked out if it wasn't for this discussion. And I was sitting next to this guy who was having the time of his life. He laughed at every joke. He laughed at every line that wasn't a joke. He was impressed every time there was like a marginally exciting action sequence. Sure, that's one guy, right? But broadly, audiences seem to be eating this stuff up.
What's the audience rating on this?
It's high, 70, something like that.
75. Even the Google reviews, audience love it. So this one's definitely been mixed. That's why I think it's got a lot to do with outside influences rather than the film itself. Because don't get twisted, like I said, the script is bad. However, for me, the action sequences kind of make up for it. And obviously with the story of the brother and his character arc, and obviously just how that kind of ends up just transpiring. I think this film has definitely received, I think it's probably one of the most, not even lopsided, but it's like the opinion on this is very weird. Usually with films you could say it's mixed, but this one is just like weirdly mixed. It's like critics, the top critics not hate it, but they dislike this movie, whereas the audience like it, love it. So it's a bit weird.
So it's something like critics 15% approval, audiences like 73, something like that. I think what explains all of this is that it's just like if you look for things like themes or ideas or whatever, then this movie is just a vacuum, right? There's nothing going on here, and so critics don't like it. And it's like a mass-produced studio movie that has no soul or anything really to really get excited about, and so and that all contributes to critics not liking it. Audiences generally approve of it because anybody who's still showing up is probably really into this stuff, whereas general audiences probably have checked out, and that is why it only made 25 million in the first week. I think general audiences have moved on, and the people still showing up are the hardcore fans, and the hardcore fans will give it a positive rating no matter what. But at the same time, you have the outrage industrial complex on YouTube and other places where people are complaining about the movie because it's a movie that came out and not because of anything specific. They would say the same thing about any other movie, probably. And the criticism doesn't seem to be in proportion to what's actually in the movie. Like, I've not watched very many of them because I've gotten really tired of them. And I hope our conversation is a little bit more interesting than just look at how awful this new movie is. But I did not really get the sense that there was anything specific that people were upset about. It's more like it's a new superhero movie, so we're gonna put out our videos talking about how terrible they are. And then in between there are people who actually care about these characters, and that's not really us as well, right? Like people who are really into the comics and whatever, and just realize that this is not Kraven. And so there's nothing interesting going on here either. And so the profitability of this goes down over time. But the reviews, like the scores, are high because anybody who bothers to give a score is invested in the franchise.
I had a question. Because kind of going off what you were saying. So who is Kraven? Because I'm not familiar with the comic books.
He's a hunter.
But in the comic books, who was he in the comic books? Like, in terms of what was his story in the comic books, and should they have gone with that?
I mean, he's like well, I don't know the comic books too well, but from like the little that I know is that he's a hunter and he hunts animals. And then obviously like in the Spider-Man world where you've got, people like Rhino, Spider-Man himself, you have like a lot of like animal themed sort of villains in sort of the Spider-Man. It's then he kind of like starts hunting some of the bigger game, like some of the Spider-Man villains or some of the Spider-Man himself. He isn't this anti-hero that they try to sort of portray him as in this movie. Is that he's like kind of like a straight up villain. But I don't know, for whatever I mean, I understand like the whole like animal sort of kind of like rights thing and sort of not wanting to show animals being hunted in this sort of kind of current climate or this day and age, but they could have replaced it with something a little bit more interesting. Yeah.
I mean, that was the thing with all of these characters, right? That they can't just be outright villains. I actually think if they had been, like we had just had this with the Penguin, right? Like the audiences are totally on board with rooting for a villain if the story is interesting and if the character is likable. Like they could have done that, right? They could have just played these characters straight. Like Kraven and Venom have to be changed because they are linked to Spider-Man specifically, so you have to do something else with them. But you could have kept their essence, right? And in the case of Kraven, that's the big game hunter who has hunted all the big games, so he starts going after people like Spider-Man, right? That's basically the initial idea, and then I think he has some other stories that I haven't read. So there was nothing inevitable or impossible about this from the start. They just had this editorial choice or this creative choice at the start, which is we have the rights to these villains. We can't use Spider-Man directly, so we're just gonna make movies about the third tier characters that people have kind of vaguely heard of, but we can't make them outright villains, so we have to turn them into anti-heroes. And that is what then led to these 6 movies that are all along those lines, right? And they just made that choice at the beginning that that's what it was going to be. And that's when we got this. But they never had really a unifying concept as to what this was all about, right? And like, it's not a new thing. Like, we've known this from the start, right? And that is kind of why I'm not outraged about Kraven, because it's just like another iteration of the same thing, right? It's just as soulless and just as creatively bankrupt and just as pointless as all the other movies were. At least like the occasional Venom movie was kind of fun in between, but that was it. Like, the rest was just a waste of space, and this is more of that. And like, what's just frustrating for me is that I think there's more potential here than the other movies had, and they don't seem to have recognized it, or if they did, they didn't care. And that's kind of the part that upsets me. And like, if I'm upset at all, which I'm not really, but the thing that gets closest to actually bothering me is that they actually had potential here for a decent story, and they just didn't do anything with it. But like, there's nothing impossible about doing a movie about Kraven. Like, there's nothing ridiculous about it.
What was confusing about this character as well was that he like shunned what his dad was doing in his dad's operation and kind of like walked away from me. So it's like, how was he financing everything? And like, these are small details which were like bothering me when I was watching the movie, because you're hiring a plane and you have like crews and this, that, and the other are flying in and out of like different countries. You're flying back and forth, but you've shunned your father's operation. So if it was just like you have cash to do like certain things or whatever like that, maybe you jump on an airline or whatever like that, okay, that's fine. You don't need to explain that. But he has a whole plane that he's using to kind of go back and forth and escape sort of from prison with. And his whole like kind of like change at the end, where again he's all about protecting animals, but then his kind of like final gift from his father was that lion, that sort of kind of like spiritual lion that gave him his powers, that he turned into a jacket, and he kind of embraced it and like kind of like awkwardly sat in that seat or whatever like that, in his more comic book accurate sort of costume. And there's a bit like, where did that come from? Because you've just been out here like killing all of these people that have been hunting all of these animals or whatever, and now you're wearing one as a jacket on you that was a trophy from your dad. And it's just like, okay, like there's some inconsistencies in this in the character which didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's just this, right? Just key jangling in front of the audience, saying, hey, you know that image of the vest, right? You know him sitting on that throne-like thing wearing the vest, right? Or the brother being the chameleon. No point to it whatsoever, right? But it's something you recognize. And you're supposed to go, yeah, like I recognize this. This is a reference to something I know, and that is supposed to be it. I didn't pick up on any character moment like at the end where something had actually changed for Kraven. Right, like he's killed his father, right, and then kind of, I guess by implication, like the brother formally takes over the crime syndicate, and then he just takes the vest because it's the last gift from his father. Like, I don't think any of that adds up to anything. It's just we want to end up at this point where he resembles a comic character, which is something that's been done before in these movies and also superhero shows, where at the end you get something that resembles what you know from the comics. But then it's over and we don't actually get to see that version. Not that this version is necessarily that. But I don't think there was anything there other than here's some familiar images. We can maybe put in the trailer, or we can put in the marketing, or to dupe people into thinking that this was about something.
So I think one thing we can all agree on, that it was a badly told story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well,
I know you guys gave the action a bit of a pass in this movie, but I don't think I was really that impressed with anything that was kind of going on.
It was okay. It was all right.
Oh wow! I'm surprised you guys
maybe like the car chase scene, like, and then when he like lapels the helicopter, that was probably like the most engaging one. But like the rest of it was not that great. And then when it actually came to the moment where he had to fight someone that also had like superpower beings in terms of like the foreigner, and he isn't the one to overcome it was a bit like, okay, like there's nothing great there.
Wow. I think unless anyone else has anything else to say, I think we should go to last thoughts.
I'm glad it's over for now. I'm glad they're putting us out of our misery for now and not releasing any more of these movies. This was frustratingly bad. Again, I do agree that there was elements of it that could have worked if they sort of kind of like narrowed in on it and focused on it a little bit more. But ultimately, I didn't get what I came for in this movie. And especially like, I know I mentioned it before, especially the part of him being a hunter and like that being the thing about him. And we actually don't see him doing much of that. It was just a bit like, okay, like what's like, honestly, what was the point of all of that? So I will give this a 3 out of 10. This was not a great movie at all. It didn't tick any of my boxes at all. So in terms of like storytelling, characters, I don't really care for action too tough, but like even action wasn't that great in here. But it just didn't tick any of my boxes. So for that reason, I give it a 3 out of 10.
For me, even though it was a discombobulated told story, I like the film, man. I'll say it was goodish, and I do want to see a Kraven 2. I just want them to fix up. I think they've kind of set a good foundation on Kraven 2. Now there's going to be more of a focus on the brother and Kraven. Like that can end up becoming a good story, but they just can't do what they did with Kraven 1 and Kraven 2, because what they did with Kraven 1, it wasn't great. You could see, like I said, it felt like it was short films put together rather than a cohesive story. And people might look at me crazy, like, how can you say it's not a great story, but then you still enjoy the film? It's because, like I said, there was like the story of the brother, and with the great action scenes, it compensated for me. But yeah, man, I had a fun time. But I do understand why other people would say that this was terrible. I definitely do not agree. It's not the worst movie to mankind. It's not the worst movie out of the Sony, out of the Sony catalog. But it definitely, like, this, in terms of like just the way that the story was told, it wasn't great. But it felt this movie for me was a sugar rush, and I kind of went into there with low expectations, and I was like surprised that it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it was better than it was better than what I expected. So, but overall, I'm gonna give this one a 6.5 out of 10.
So I think it had a better foundation than a lot of the others. It just confused about what it's about. It spends too much time on things that distract from what's actually interesting about it. The good parts aren't good enough, and the things that take up the bulk of the movie are just complete wastes of time. I'm not angry about it. I'm just like, it's just whatever. It's not worth watching. It's not worth spending time on. It's not worth revisiting. But it's, I think, better than most of the others. And for that reason, I give it 2,000 millimorbiuses.
Hi, guys. Thank you very much for tuning into today's episode. Hervé?
Yeah, let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Were you one of the sort of many people that did enjoy this movie? It seemed like it got a really good audience score. What do you think about the movie? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? Let us know in the comment section down below. And of course, if you liked our discussion today, tell a friend. And if you thought we were chatting absolute poo, then tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
Thanks, guys. We will catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.